University of Alabama in Birmingham. My name is Lee Naves, and it's my privilege this evening to serve as moderator for the program. We have two very special guests. One is Dr. Yosef Ben-Jochannan, who is an African anthropologist, an educator, an author, and a scholar. He's on my right, and on my left is Dr. George Simmons. Dr. Simmons is also a professor. He was born in the St. Croix, Virgin Islands, USA. And we will discuss a number of topics this evening. These gentlemen are here to talk about African origins. As you know, in America, Black History Month is celebrated every February. Without further ado, let's get right into it, because I know they have some interesting viewpoints that will stimulate your thinking, even if you disagree with them or agree. I'm going to call you Dr. Ben, if that's okay, because I understand that's what people usually call you.
Yes.
One of the more controversial positions that you take is that Black Africans landed in America 2,000 years before Columbus.
I would not specify the day, but probably exceeding 2,000 years. The fact is that Columbus never came to the United States of America or North and South America. He came as close as San Salvador. There's a rumor that says that Columbus came to America. He did not come to America. He came to an island of America. Vespucci came to America, not Columbus. He came to the Caribbeans. But it is commonly stated, just as much as they state, that Columbus discovered America while the Indians sat down watching him doing it. Now, but the knowledge of Africans in the Americas, quite knowledgeable to scholars. The fact that it's suppressed doesn't have any validity at all.
Let me bounce a couple of things off of you. One thing, this article that I'm going to be referring to our home audience and to our studio audience, this article came out in the September 1981 issue of Science Digest, and it's entitled Black Kings in Ancient America. You and some other black scholars believe that these people, African people, came to this continent before Columbus.
We don't believe, we know.
How do you know? What evidence?
The evidence is there. For example, when you go to Central America, the Yucatan Peninsula, and at Ecuador and places like that, they have caches of Carthaginian money found 200 feet down in the ground, meaning that there were pluvial disruptions, and those money was buried. So it indicates a period of time, at least from that, when you look at the stratas, you could tell the period of time in which they've been here. And when you're talking about Carthage, you're talking about at least 212 BC, when Carthage was finally destroyed by the Romans. Again, the Queen Makeda, which you call the Queen of Sheba, there are maps which Rome, the church in Rome, the so-called Holy Father, has suppressed these maps from the time of Justinian, showing South America and what is today called Central America. The maps there, and Makeda goes back to at least 892 BC.
Before Christ.
Before the
Let me point out another thing, just from the same article. I don't know if we can see this on television, but here is a picture. Tell me what this is, and why do you see this as proof of the presence of Africans in America before?
That is the
Columbus.
head of an Olmec, and the Olmecs were said to be the first of the indigenous Americans. And if you look, if an Olmec walked in here, then you would believe that he had come from the middle of Africa. And there is no doubt about it that all of the writers prior to racism admitted that the Olmecs were in fact Africans who had come across here. There is no doubt when Pigafetta and others, the point is that Van Sertima is writing and others, but Leo Weiner in 1938 at Harvard University wrote a 2-volume book for which he was fired about the Africans, Olmecs being Africans. And
let me bounce this off of you, okay? You take the same statue. You say, well, you say that they're obviously black features, thick lips, broad nose.
The stereotype.
But, okay, the stereotype. Other anthropologists say, I think Michael Cole was one of them. He says that this is not a black man. He said the people who made these statues, which I understand are 8 feet high, the people who made these statues didn't have sharp enough tools to give them white features, So they're not really black statues. They're white people carved with crude tools. What's your response to that?
It's strange that the tools were not sharp enough to make narrow noses, but it was sharp enough to put eyelids. So it would seem to me that an eyelid is harder to make than a thin nose. But Michael Cole is no less a racist than the head of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, what's the difference between Michael Cole Reagan and the Ku Klux Klan? It have the same philosophy. What is the difference between the fellows writing the Bible and write about the Queen of Sheba saying to Solomon, look not, ye daughters of Kedar, look not upon me because I'm black. My parents sent me in the vineyard and that's all this nonsense. She's black because nature made her black. Her mother and father were black, that's why she's black. Had nothing to do with going in any vineyard, even though it's in the Bible.
Okay, you talked about religion. We're going to get to that in a while. Let me turn to Dr. Simmons. You also agreed with this position that Africans were in this...
I have no problem, no doubt.
Why?
As a matter of fact, speaking about, like Dr. Ben mentioned, and you spoke about Michael Nico, I own a book several years ago, and still have it in my possession, by Michael Nico himself, who is considered one of America's leading archaeologists and anthropologists from Yale, one of America's most prestigious schools. In his own work, he referred to them as Negroid. And he went further to state the title of the book is America's First Civilization, what you call civilization. And to turn around and to tell these youngsters and other people in America in particular that the black men were the first to build any type of civilization in the Americas will be disturbing to Americans. And so...
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Even if you're right, let's say you're right, what difference does it make?
It makes a lot of difference.
What kind of difference?
It takes the inferiority complex out of the black man who felt that his only beginning and relationship here in this part of the world is that of slavery. Then it puts him in the driver's seat because, again, they don't tell you that there are man-made hills within the United States. They call them mounds. And they range from in the Midwest all the way down the eastern seacoast of the United States. And they have found artifacts in them that are similar to things found in West Africa and in Egypt, which is Northeast Africa, that predates the arrival of the so-called indigenous Indians to these lands. Another thing is some years ago, one of the major television networks back in New York, I don't remember exactly which one, ABC or which, had did a documentary, and they said that these Olmecs are the ones who brought right into the Americas about 3000 BC. To tell blacks that they ought to be glad to enter into these schools of higher learning today in order to read and write, because their ancestors back in Africa couldn't read and write. You see what it will do to tell them that they brought right into the Americas? Antonio Pigafetta, that Dr. Ben mentioned, who sailed with Magellan when Magellan came to the so-called New World in 1519, when they landed at the land of Verzin, which we now call Brazil, they were met by people in canoes that carried as many as 40 people. And Antonio Pigafetta recorded that these people were jet black. It seemed that they came out of the infernal marshes. That meant that they were burned. He said, naked and black as they are in 1519, 27 years after Columbus's arrival to the so-called New World. Another thing they don't tell you, again, you heard my associate...
Well, why haven't we heard these things before? Why don't we read them in the New York Times, the Birmingham News?
If I stole another man's country, and I brought your ancestors here to work for me, could I tell you how great your ancestors were and still expect to keep you in slavery?
Well, let me give you a better, not better necessarily, but an added situation of that. Most black people in Birmingham, Alabama, like in Harlem, New York, are Christians, and they go to in a black community, a black minister, a black congregation, but with a white Jesus, because they didn't know that that Jesus, up until Pope Julius II, had the first black Jesus painted. He had Michelangelo to do it, but up until that time, the world worshipped the black Madonna and Child. The present Pope is going back to Poland to worship at the statue of the black Madonna and Child. That's in the New York Times. But what the Times says the next day, Don't worry about the Black Madonna and the child. She was originally white, but there was a storm in the 16th century, passed by and turned it black. But the same storm must have gone to Spain, and then it went to Ethiopia, and it went to the Soviet Union and turned all the Black Madonnas black. It was a hell of a storm.
Well, okay, let's get together here. I mean, we're jumping around, and I think we're going to have a beautiful, interesting hour, okay? Because of this subject, I was going to get to this later.